Good afternoon, one and all. Let me check my sound's going in. It is James here from the EverLearner. Wonderful to see you. We've got an AQA GCSE Paper 2 session coming up for you right now. What day are we? We're Wednesday, the 11th of May. It's 4 o'clock UK, wherever you are. Might be different. Probably UK. And we've got Marta here as well. Marta, you're here for the start of the session with us tonight, but not the end, right? Marta has got the very crucial job of taking our daughter to work, so that can't be here at the end of the session, unfortunately. So our colleague Marta's going to help us out with questions. Talking of questions, if you are watching on the Hub page and you are live, you can enter questions via the live chat that's there. That comes straight through to us, and we'll either answer the question via chat or we'll bring that question onto the camera and answer it for you live. Okay, so do please ask us questions. We actually really value it, folks. It gives us a real indication that what we're teaching, what we're putting out is relevant for you, and we really would value you giving that kind of opportunity for us to answer your questions. So that's that. You should have in front of you your notes pages. You should have in front of you your practice question, which you've probably attempted. Your mark schemes and your model answers should be somewhere in your vicinity. Okay, that's the full set of resources that we've provided. Now, obviously, we're going to be going through stuff like classification of skill. We're going to be doing engagement patterns. We're going to be doing all that kind of information processing. There's a lot of detail in this paper 2 section, a lot of detail which is really reliable because, of course, we're covering everything which is on the AEI. Can I please stress to every student who is taking part in this, there is no belief whatsoever that the material on the AEI is broad enough for you to study only that. You really need to study everything clearly, but of course it makes sense for us to cover this because we know it's going to be on the paper, therefore we're covering it for you. Big favour, please. I would be deeply grateful if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel, smack the hell out of that like button for this particular show, whether you're watching it live right now or on demand. It truly helps us to be able to do things for free and what have you. So just those little things make quite a big difference, and we really, really appreciate it. With that all understood, Marta, is there anything you'd like to add before we get cracking? We've mentioned messages, we've mentioned notes, we've mentioned... Oh, you teachers, just be reminded, if you like the sort of questions and things that we've got on the exam simulator and you're not subscribed to us, they're available for a free trial for 28 days. If you want your students to use them prior to their exams, it's a really nice way of preparing them, actually. Just give us a shout and we can get you sorted out with that. Okay. Marta, anything further? Now, we're expecting the first half of today to be a little bit chunkier and the second half a little bit narrower. I want to get over the hump of this material this afternoon and make sure in session 1, the first part of the session, we get lots done. Scribble, lots of notes, lots of talking. Get it down there, please. Right, here we go. Transferring over to the canvas. Let's hope this works. So let's classify some skills. And I guess it's worth just thinking here, why would we do, what's the point of this? And it's really important when we come to how we practice this kind of, the kind of different skills that we might be faced with. It's really important when we come to information processing, how that might take long. It's really important when it comes to things like reaction time and why things might take longer and slower to respond to particular stimuli, for example. Now, with all that sort of understood, let's get straight into this. I want to talk specifically about basic and complex skills and open and closed skills. That, of course, we've got our externally and self-paced, and we've got our gross and our fine, but they've not been named in our AEI. To remind you, that does not mean they're not going to be questioned. It simply means we don't know if they're going to be questioned. We happen to know for a fact that these two here are going to be questioned, so hence us putting our focus on those for today. What is a basic skill? It is a skill that takes few decisions. It is a skill that can be learned quickly. Let me actually put the word learned in there, better. Learned. Learned quickly, and it requires low levels of coordination. Okay, of coordination. So that's what we mean by a basic skill. So examples would be things like running, throwing, catching. Well, catching actually does require quite a lot of decisions. I'm also going to put in here low levels of concentration. So that's what we mean by a basic skill. Before we sort of start thinking about lots and lots of different examples, let's look at the alternative. Let's have a look at what we would mean by a complex skill. And by a complex skill, we are talking about, not surprisingly, lots of decisions. So there's a lot of need for perception and selective attention, more of which in a little while. They tend to be learned slowly. They tend to have high concentration, and they tend to have high coordination. So we've got these kind of coordination. We've got these kind of descriptors here. So I would say anything which is kind of like, anything which is certainly open is going to be up here, right? Anything is going to be open because it's got lots of decisions by definition. So think of it sort of game reactions, this kind of thing. The other thing I would say is anything which is kind of very much a kind of a sport technique
because it's been learned, because it's had to be done gradually, because it requires concentration and coordination to do it, it's quite likely to be at this end. Here, down here, we've probably got more things like close skills, and we've probably got more fundamental skills. And that's why I was saying things like our running, our throwing, our kicking, rather than over here, we might have something like a bowling action as a form of, in cricket, as a form of throwing. We might have a penalty kick conversion action in rugby as a type of kicking. Okay, it takes longer to actually undertake that particular skill. Now, let's move this forward. We've also got open and closed skills here. And when we talk about open skills, we're talking about things that occur in a changing environment. Okay, a changing environment. So a classic example of these would be things like game skills or responding to an opponent. Anything that involves you responding to an opponent is a changing environment, because the opponent is effectively dictating how that environment goes. We can also say that these skills are unstable. Now, that doesn't mean that they're dangerous or anything like that. It just means that the skill has to be performed differently in at different moments. And finally, I'm going to sort of just squeeze this in over here. I'm going to say that these skills are performed to suit the situation. Okay, so I often think a classic example of this would be something like a goalkeeper save. It's completely open, because how you perform that skill, whether it's in hockey or football or whatever, however you perform that skill is completely dependent on the flight, the position, the direction of the ball. It probably also matters where certain attacking players are in terms of where you push the ball to and so on. That's completely unique. So we find these skills on this side to be very adaptable. Okay, they have to be adaptable skills. So that it helps here then if we go to our closed skills. Well, what are these closed skills? These are not affected by the environment. Okay, so in other words, they're consistently done again and again the same way each time. So they're done the same each attempt. And classic examples of these would be things like a javelin throw. There's no external influence on that throw. It would be something like a long jump. Okay, you might adjust your run up, but once you've done that, you're going to jump the same way. You can give it more or less effort, I suppose. What we do not include on this continuum with open close is things like the weather, things like it's raining, it's windy. We do not include that in this continuum, okay? And the reason I state that is it's such a common answer for students, and I categorically believe it's a wrong answer for this particular continuum, okay? For weather to affect, let's say, a javelin throw, the javelin throw would have to be approaching the line, and as they threw it, the weather would have to drastically change during the performance in order for that performance to be affected by it, okay? So we're saying up here, these will be things like our javelin, our long jump, I'll put LJ in there, a javelin, a long jump. We could be talking about moments in games which are closed, such as a penalty kick in rugby, nothing else affects it, or a conversion. But over here, we're talking about our game skills. I think the best examples over here are things like defending where you or goalkeeping where you're responding to your opponents and what they do. Now, can I just repeat that our pacing and our what we call our muscular involvement, our gross fine, are not on the AEI. I'm just going to give you a couple of descriptors. Self-paced skills. In fact, I'll just go really quick. I feel bad if I don't include these for you. It starts. These self-paced starts when performer decides. So the performer dictates when the skill starts and when it doesn't. So this couldn't be, for example, a sprint start, because that's when the gun goes, right? So a sprint start is obviously an externally paced skill. We also have that the speed or the rate of the performance controlled by the performer. Okay, so for a self-paced skill, the controller themselves determines the degree to which they pace what they're doing. Is entirely down to them. And examples again would be things like our javelin throw. Examples would be our conversion in rugby. Examples would be things like marathon running. It's up to the performer to decide on those factors. Whereas our externally paced skills, of course, these are a little bit different. What we've got here is started because of an external factor. Because of an external factor. Okay, so such as the starting pistol would be an example. We might have in here things like sprint start. We might have in here things like a goalkeeper save. And then just quickly, let's cover gross and fine, even though they're not on the AEI. I feel bad if I leave them out, basically. What we've got here is What a description. Growth skills are big movements, apparently. They're involving large muscle groups. So think about quadriceps, biceps. Think about hamstring contracts. Think about the gluteals. Think about the hip flexors. Movements such as hip flexion, otherwise, or we might include in that sprinting. The sprinting technique is obviously a growth skill because it's using these large muscle groups for large movements, right? Whereas our fine skills, they involve small movements, and they are involving small muscle groups. Okay, so in this side, think about things such as, I often think about anything which involves aiming, which is a really nice one. So good examples of that would be sort of wrist spinning when you're bowling in cricket, for example. That's a very fine skill to rotate the wrist in a particular precise way, using small muscle groups and using the fingers to delicately adjust the ball as you throw. The actual shoulder action is quite gross, but the finger action would be quite fine, right? So anything which involves in aiming and precision, a really nice one. Would often include something like archery, the adjustments of like how you're going to sort of actually aim would be a nice example as well. So they are our different skills classifications. So let's have a look here. Using an example, define a closed skill. It's done in a consistent environment, and we're going to use the long jump. We've got other examples here, and you could have loads of others as well. Another question. Using a sporting example, define a complex skill, so it requires decision making. And we're going to say, and by the way, can I be clear? Someone gave me some grief about this the other day. Batsman is the ECB term for any person holding a cricket bat, okay? It is not meant to be gender specific. So that person had a go at me the other day. We think about this stuff. And we put that term in reluctantly because it is the accepted term. So don't have a go at me about it. Batsmen in cricket responding to the specific delivery they're facing. So that would be a complex skill. Decision making, batsman or batsperson responding to a particular delivery. Got some other examples there that you can have a look at as well. This next one, we're given a skill and we're asked to classify it on our two continuum. In this case, it's a goalkeeper save. And what we've got to do here, we've got to say, well, first of all, it's got to be complex because it requires decision making. Now, notice here, we are effectively, what we're doing here is justifying why it's a complex skill. So I'm saying it's a complex skill, but I must make, because it's decision making, to get my second mark. So look, we've got the idea complex decision making. Here we're saying it's open, very similar to complex in many ways, because it's performed in a uniquely different environment each time. Open and why. If we get our justify skill, that's what we need to be doing. We must state the why, otherwise we're getting half marks at best. Okay, let's fly into our next section. We're whizzing past on our specification. We're whizzing past things like goal setting, for example. In a minute, we're going to leave out guidance and all kinds of other stuff that wasn't named on the AI. We're going to talk about basic information processing. And from the start, I want to use the example of a catch. So I'm going to be teaching this to you as theory, but we're going to try and apply it to the example of a cricket catch at all times. We're going to see if I can manage to do that. First things first, I'm going to use sort of the green pen to talk about what the input is. Another word for the input stage of this is the display, and it's a nice term to get into your answers if you're able to. And effectively, the display is all the information in our environment, both external and internal, and we receive inputs via senses. So, for example, without getting into the too much specifics of physics, obviously the biology of our eye is capable of receiving photons of light bouncing around, and we can sense that, right? Just as our ears are able to catch those poofs of air as they vibrate and cause noise once they are received and interpreted. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about senses. We're talking about light hitting the eye. We're talking about vibrating air hitting the ears. We could be talking about the feeling of the ball hitting our hands, or the proprioception within our body. Oh, that's a big word to use. Or the feel within our body of whether we're balanced or not. These are all senses to us. Now, what we do in this input stage is we perform something called selective attention. So let's just think about this a second. So go back to our cricket example. What we're going to get is that the eyes, they see the ball. They don't make any decision. They don't know what it is. The eyes do not have any executive in them. They are simply receiving that. They're able to catch the speed, the position, the angle, the height of the ball. That's what the senses, in this case, the eyes do. But another part of this is actually in between these parts. before we pass it to the decision making, we selectively attend. So we might also catch, in this case, if I just go back in here, the colour of the green of the trees. We might catch, for example, or we might notice, for example, we might notice someone who's watching behind the rope. We might see a cloud moving across the sky. All of that is irrelevant to the performance. So we selectively attend it out of our perception. So we've got the selective attention at this stage, and we can describe that as blocking out. So in other words, we only attend to the relevant things. In this case, it's going to be the flight of the ball, the position of the ball, the speed of the ball. That's what we're interested in. Now, that information is now passed on to our decision making. Now, can I be clear? There's lots of different processes here, but I'm going to use red to depict this decision making. In this decision making, we compare the information. Okay, so we are comparing that information, and we compare that information to information we hold in a long-term memory. Okay, so in essence, we receive the stimuli of where the ball is, in essence, and we compare that to previous experiences in the long-term memory. Meanwhile, we hold this information in the short-term memory. So we're holding effectively the information about the flight, the position of the ball, and we're holding it in the short-term memory, and we are comparing it to the long-term memory. And what we do off the back of that is we select an appropriate response. An appropriate response. So we select what we're going to do. In this case, what are we going to do? We're going to raise the shoulders in perhaps a flexion sense. We're going to raise them above our head. We're going to extend our fingers. We're going to clasp our hands together, and we're going to catch the ball, above our head. That's what we mean. Now, our output is really, really simple, and that is to say that the information is sent to the muscles. So we've decided to raise our arms above our head. We've decided to clasp our fingers, to extend our fingers. That information is sent to the muscle, and that is what we mean by the output. This is via nerves. Now, you guys know all about the nervous system from your biology. In fact, let me actually write this. Via the nervous system is probably a better way of putting this. Okay, so we've got here our central nervous system here. Obviously, in this sense, it's voluntary movement, and ultimately, the movement is performed. Okay, the movement is performed. Okay, we actually do the catch, and because we move, that feedback is then enabled. So when we've actually performed, we get intrinsic feedback. We get intrinsic, and this is the feel, the ball entering the hands, the feeling of being in balance. Maybe we've dived, and it's the feeling of the hip landing on the turf or something like that. But we also get extrinsic feedback. And that extrinsic feedback could be from others. It could be someone shouting, "Great catch." It could also be the outcome. You know, I caught the ball, the person was out. The outcome tells me, it's a form of feedback that then is sensed via our senses, which are back in the input stage. So they are our 4 stages of information processing. And as you probably already know, we have put this in as a possible 9-mark question for you. Now, to just be clear, I don't want anyone to think we're predicting this as a 9-mark question. I have no idea. We just think it's a really, really valuable part of the course to cover and make sure that you can cover sufficiently. A volleyball player uses basic information processing models to be able to execute a skill. We agree. Analyze, which means break down and explain, perfect for our information processing, because of course we've got input, decision making, output, feedback. We've got those. IDMOF, never thought about that before. IDMOF, I'm going to go for that. I'm going to claim that as mine. IDMOF, a bit of IDMOF in your life. Anyway, analyze the stages of the model for a volleyball player to be able to perform the skill to a high level. Okay. So they're performing a skill, doesn't say which one. So what are we going to do first of all? First of all, we're going to define information processing. Information processing is using all the information in the display in order to make the correct decision. This is very much an AO1 point, okay? I'm just stating a fact. It's also an AO1 point to say that it involves an AOA, so it involves 4 stages, okay? So I'm just saying it involves 4 stages. And look, here are my 4 stages. I'm just getting my facts in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start analysing. So here we go. I'm going to take my input first as my first part. Input is the senses detecting cues from the display. For example, the volleyball player will see the flight of the ball towards them, and they might hear a call of "your ball" by their teammate. So all I've done there is I've taken this and I've said how that relates to volleyball. What would be the input for a particular skill? Let's take decision making. Decision making uses working memory. This is a really nice term for you to use, by the way, working memory. That's what we might also call short-term memory for the decision making part. Uses working memory, and the player can selectively attend to the flight of the ball. So we're now using selective attention, specifically rather than any other irrelevant stimuli. For example, the player might ignore the stance of the umpire, so we're filtering out to the net, but will attend to the angle of the ball coming towards them. The player will decide whether to dig, set, or spike the ball within decision making. So the better the selective attention, the better the quality of the movement. So we focus on that selective attention as well. In other words, good selective attention leads to optimal performance levels and a higher chance that the dig shot will be well positioned. If the player gets the selective attention wrong or focus on the irrelevant information, there's a higher chance the shot will hit the ground or the net, leading to the loss of a point. So I'm saying here specifically, and of course the selective attention is between the input and the decision making, specifically now linking this to volleyball, clearly talking about volleyball throughout this. Anyway, we'll go further. Furthermore, if the decision making is slow, the dig shot might not be recalled fast enough from the long-term memory, and the ball may pass the player without a response. This links to react. And now I'm going into synoptic links. So we're saying that sometimes information processing is too slow. It links to reaction time, which is the time between the onset of a stimulus and the initiation of response. So all I've done there is I've made a synoptic link, and I've just defined what reaction time is. And a little clue here, guys: reaction time is a really nice one to link with basic information processing, because if we look at our information processing model, okay, like this, it looks like that, isn't it? The one put the labels in. Reaction time is how long does this take? That's all that is. That's what reaction time is. If reaction time is slow, the ball will be missed and the point lost. Anyway, let's go forward here. They will recall the dig shot from their long-term memory and will send via a neural message, that just means nervous system, to the arms and legs via the central nervous system to produce the order of muscle contractions required to perform the dig shot. Practicing a great deal causes a better storage of movement in the long-term memory, a greater chance the accurate dig shot technique will be recalled. Because a dig shot is an open skill, now linking again to our synoptic, the player should practice in an open or varied environment with balls being hit from different angles at different speeds. This will improve the quality of the output stage and the adaptability. Okay, so the output is actually the movement, and I'm even linking that to how it could be practiced. And then we're going into our feedback. Feedback is normally received after the dig shot has been played, but can occur during the skill too. For example, the player will receive intrinsic feedback from the feel of the shot and whether it felt right, but will also receive extrinsic feedback in the form of where the ball went, but also any comments from their coach teammates about the shot. An example could be the coach shouting, "Great block." Now, we're just going to talk a little bit about feedback here. Positive feedback such as praise will reinforce the correct dig shot. So I'm just, again, synoptically linking here and mean it is stored better in the long-term memory. Negative feedback will cause the player to change their response the next time they need to play a dig shot. In conclusion, notice I'm concluding, decision-making with basic information processing is critical for a volleyball player, but so is their power. So it's not just about information processing. For this reason, volleyball players are advised to do plyometrics training to improve power. They can also control arousal through mental rehearsal. See, I'm just linking the volleyball. And often, I think this is an important point, because when we think about our synoptic links with 9 markers, we often think we've got to link the theory. Well, what about linking the example? You know, if we've got a volleyball player here, of course they've got to control arousal. Of course that they could use mental rehearsal. Of course they could use plyometrics. And then we've got a little bit here, arousal affects information processing. If the wrong level of arousal is found, a player may miss the relevant cues and focus on the irrelevant information. And we're suggesting, folks, that is a 9-mark answer. The key point I want to drive home here is, can you see that I gave my A1s, and then what I did was I analysed. And analysed is to break down, in this case, into input, into decision making, into output, into feedback. So I broke it down to those, I applied it to volleyball, and then I linked it synoptically to other areas of the course, and that's what we're after. Okay, let's go down to engagement patterns. Now, folks, I'm going to be honest with you here. It's such a gargantuan topic that if I try and teach you every word of it, we'll be here all afternoon, okay? So what I'm going to do is something slightly different. Look, the bottom line is I've prepared these resources for you. You've got to cover these resources. If you don't, what's the word I'm going to use? You're a bit of a wally, basically, so make sure you do. So what I'm saying here is that I want to make sure that you realise that if you get a question on gender participation, first of all, it's quite likely to be statistical. We'll look at some examples of these sorts of things in a second. You might be given a graph or data tables. But the point I want to make to you, folks, is there is credit available when you answer the question to do with attitudes, role models, accessibility, media coverage, sexism, stereotyping, culture, religion, family, time, familiarity, education, money, and inclusiveness. So just as an example with gender, let's go through all of this for one, and I'll leave the others for you. You've got to learn them, bottom line. So what we're saying about attitudes to gender in sport, well, basically in our society, male sport is seen as dominant or relevant. Female sport is less valued or undervalued. With regard to role models, we're saying there are fewer female role models. Maybe this is improving. Think about the WSL, think about the televised nature of the Women's Super League with the netball, whatever it happens to be. But this is improving, but there's still nowhere near. And a little stat you might want to find interesting, on the BBC Sport main page, it's thought that female representation is 1 to 20 of male representation. What I mean by that is for every female article about a female performer, there's 20 to do with males, and that's on the BBC, which is supposed to be this egalitarian. Anyway, you take my point. It's quite interesting to think about that. Accessibility, there's fewer female clubs in many sports. Think about cricket, rugby. Media coverage, female sport coverage judged to be at 5% of male, hence my stat over here, 1 in 20. Sexism, stereotyping. There's the traditional image of the tomboy for a female who's very, very sporty. We've got the traditional image of the sissy for a non-aggressive, less physical male. Now, guys, can we please recognise that these are terms that are historic terms and are effectively stereotypical labels? Okay, we're not advocating their use in any way, shape, or form. Here, culture, religion, not really applicable in the gender sense. Family commitments. Females do more domestic chores. They do more childcare. We often refer to this as the double shift because they work in the day, and women often do their sort of more of the domestic stuff in the evening or the weekends. Just sip my tea there, sorry. Leisure time, females have less, especially females with children. Why? Because of this stuff above. Familiarity not relevant. Females participate in different sports at school to males. So think about school experience. Lots of netball maybe. Lots of hockey maybe. Nothing wrong with these sports. Both my daughters play both of these sports. Okay, brilliant sports. But think about the experience of boys. They tend to play football. They tend to play cricket. They tend another one, by the way, which would be a good one for women, would be tennis. Okay, tennis was the first acceptable sport for women, so in the historical context. But we've got football, we've got cricket, etc. So we've got this different experience through schools. Disposable income, females tend to have less disposable income than men, obviously many exceptions. And adaptability, inclusiveness, some female-only clubs are developing. And we've got increased availability of female-focused activities. You know, think about women's rugby clubs and sessions. Now, the point I want to make here, and you can go through these yourselves, is you can go through the exact same points with these other factors. Just one with familiarity for race and religion here, because we didn't look at that there. Just notice here, familiarity of what you might call British cultural sports. Recent migrants to the country may have less understanding of British sporting customs and practices. So this is ultimately about assimilation, how people assimilate into what you might call British sporting culture. And anyway, you get the idea. We're going on there to do with friends and peers, and we're going on there to do with disability. Folks, I hope you're okay with it, but if we go over every word of this, like A, you're going to be bored senseless, and B, you're still going to have to learn it afterwards anyway. So go and learn it, go through that, be able to reproduce what I've included in those tables when you're asked about these things in context. Now, I'm going to change the canvas here, and we're going to do some questions on this, which will hopefully emphasize what we're talking about. Okay, let's have a go at this. We've got a question here. We have got the idea of gender, age are two factors that affect engagement patterns in physical activity. Identify three others. So we've got three others. Nice, simple AO1 stuff. Ethnicity, peer group, disability. Okay, peer group could also be family, friends, could be the same wording. And then you see the selection, the mark scheme there. Obviously, check the mark scheme you've got in front of you. Now here, we've got an interesting question. We've got the idea here. Using this graphical data, and can I please stress that engagement patterns are really likely to come with data tables, graphs. Using this graphical data to support your answer, explain how ethnicity affects involvement in sport and physical activity in this town, okay? So we've got to not only say what's happening, but guys, can you please ensure that you bring the numbers into your answer? It's not okay just to say people do more football. Like, give the numbers when you're doing this. So non-white participants are underrepresented across everything. Okay, based on the graph, because the non-white that's meant to be white population is 46%, but the level of participation, but no level of participation reaches 46%. Can you see that I've given the numbers to back up what I'm saying? Non-white people, this is meant to be no white people. Non-white people are extremely underrepresented in coaching and admin roles, which are occupied almost entirely by white individuals. So they've here again, nice, but we haven't put the numbers here, but we've given almost entirely, we're given the scale, the quantity. This must mean that many non-white participants, 37% doing clubs are non-white and 31% playing sport are non-white, are not continuing to become coaches, officials, and volunteers at clubs. So I've given the stats on that. This in turn means there are very few role models for young people, for young non-white community members to aspire to. So in other words, folks, we've interpreted the data in the graph, we've included that data to support our answers, and we've given a commentary about what that data actually means, but we have included the data itself, okay? It's really important that we go on to do that. Let's take things a little bit further now. We're looking at the positive and negative impacts of sponsorship on the media. So of course, we've got our notion of commercialization, which is super important for us on this course. And can I stress to you that you can be asked here, notice, it could be the impact on the performer, it could be the impact on the sport, it could be the impact on officials, referees and umpires, it could be the impact on spectators, and it could be the impact on the sponsor themselves. Now, what we find with students in these areas is that they tend to be quite good when they look at the impact of media and sponsorship on the performer side, but they forget about the impact on the sponsor. Well, what if you get asked that version? Or what if you're asked a 9 marker, it's on the performer and the sponsor? You've got to be able to break it down that way. So anyway, let's look at them in turn. Performer first. We must evaluate, folks. So this is designed to be an evaluation, and we're given strengths and weaknesses, positives and negatives. Why is it good for the performer? Equipment and clothing, more money to pay for facilities and equipment. They're paid to wear sponsors' clothes. They receive higher wages. This is one of the most beautiful points here. That all of that leads to that they can be full-time, and that makes them better athletes, which in turn means they can receive more sponsorship, right? They can turn performers into heroes and role models. So we've got this sort of fame here because it's being published by the media, and more money to pay for better coaching training, which makes us a better performer. It makes us better. So they're all positive. So if your sport is commercialized and there's media and sponsorship involvement, that's some pretty damn good stuff, right? However, it comes at a cost. You need to win. Okay, because what's valued in those environments is high performances and winning. So this is pressure. The sports have to change times to suit, say, TV audiences. If you do anything wrong, if you spit, swear, get into a confrontation, it's going to be plastered on the media, isn't it? Because it's kind of juicy and meaty. As we do this, there's all kinds of juicy and meaty stuff in the media, maybe not all of it sporting, but people really sort of lap it up, don't they? There's a lack of privacy thing, especially about social media involvement there. Sponsors can be controlling, they can take your time, they can tell you what to do for a fee. Obviously, people are being paid, expectations become too high, and people experience stress, anxiety, depression, schedule performance your related roles. You stop training. I often think about combat performance. They're not going to be what they call a fight, and they've got all kinds of interviews and press shows, and they're often cutting weight, and they're about to go into a physical battle. I think that must be really tough. And the media immediately after. And this word is important because this can often lead to emotion and people saying the wrong thing, which then gets picked up and people criticise and so on. If we look at the sport, then we get media sponsorship brings more investment. It means that sports become more public and they become more popular and people might take them up. We get more modernised media coverage, interactive timelines and whatever it be. We'll look at that in technology in a second. Sports become global, audience all around the world, which increases the sort of the clout of it. But we lose our tradition. We lose who we were. Okay, who we were. Maybe who we were was good. Now, I'm not saying it has to stay the same, but we lose that. Sport becomes entertainment rather than this kind of expression of human athleticism. Maybe it's like watching the Kardashians. Maybe not literally, but it's we can certainly link. I mean, you've probably experienced it. Shall I watch Netflix or shall I watch the football or whatever it happens to be, right? It's a similar sort of thing. Negative stories are published, such as drugs in athletics or cycling, and so they should be. Sport needs to change its rules. Think about things like cricket and T20, badminton that changed its rules so that every point was meaningful and so on to become more kind of commercially relevant. And sports can be linked with unhealthy products such as alcohol. And we're obviously the sponsors here. If you look at gambling sponsorship in football, and especially like championship level football, it's really sort of omnipresent. It's everywhere. What about on the officials? We get better training and standards because of the investment. Referees can become professional, which of course is really, really good in that sense, better standards. And because there's media involvement, one of the things that media does, and we'll talk about this in a second, media leads to technology. Because often the technology that we use in sport is media-based. So that leads to better decision-making, more of which probably in the second half of this today. Negative decisions are highlighted for referees. So if a referee makes a mess, that's going to get shown and they get criticised. They get more pressure on them as a result. Wrong decisions can have serious financial and personal implications, and loss of control of decisions are increasingly switched to technology. So that's that tradition point again. Referees and umpires become less and less relevant because the technology through the media company becomes more. Spectators get the following positive and negatives: increased coverage of their favourite team. Woo woo, fantastic. My younger daughter Georgina, she's a massive Man City fan, and she can watch them non-stop. In fact, are they on tonight? I'm just trying to think. They might be on tonight. High quality coverage in 4K and 5K. What's not to like? Sporting storylines continuously, lots of entertainment, increased funding leads to better playing quality. The players are getting better. I use my Man City example again. I think they've just signed Haaland, is that right? Anyway, stadium improved due to increased investment. Okay, so where you go and sit in the stadium, it's nicer, but there's negatives for the spectator. The timings become warped and strange to suit the media and maybe markets in Asia or wherever it happens to be. It becomes expensive for your subscription. Ticket prices increase because it's so popular. Merchandise goes off the chart of expense because people want to look like they do on the TV. And when you go to the stadium, you can only buy certain things because the sponsor wants their stuff in there. But what about the sponsor themselves? Why do they sponsor things? Brand awareness, return on investment. I really would like you to get the term ROI into your answer. I'm a business person, obviously, and I'd be so proud of you if you get return. Basically, just so you business people know this, business study students, ROI means for every pound you spend on sponsorship, we work on an ROI of 4. Okay, so what that means is every pound of let's say advertising we use, we anticipate £4 back. That's a 1 to 4 return on investment, and obviously sponsors are going to be doing the same way. Product link with healthy sport. Okay, that's really good if we get things like health food, water companies, whatever it happens to be, and the products linked with winning, right? So think about this one, healthy sport. If you're Mackie D's, how do they spell McDonald's? If you're McDonald's, even though you're considered to be quite an unhealthy product, if you get linked to sport, it kind of sort of justifies you, makes you sort of feel a bit more healthy, even if it's not. Anyway, negatives. There's no guarantee that sponsorship's going to bring you a return. The team may not win and it may lose, so you don't know who's going to win or lose. And the athlete that you're sponsoring may go and do something mad. Think about Lance Armstrong. It was sponsored by so many companies, and then it turned out that he'd been doping for years and years and years and years. So there's some of our issues. Now, questions, and we'll take a break after this. Explain how media coverage can positively affect sport. Okay, so this is for the sport notice, not the performer, not the sponsor, not the spectator, not the official. Increased media coverage can promote interest. An example is Wimbledon fever when tennis courts in the UK are filled for 2 weeks. The sport also has more income and can invest in grassroots. Increasing numbers of competitions leads to spectatorship, more role models, and we've got higher participation. So lots of really nice points in there. This one's a really nice one. It's our 6th mark in this case. We've got the question here. In 2020, the high-profile footballer Rashford used Twitter to campaign for free school meals. Evaluate the use of social media on the performer and the sport. So we've got to evaluate, so we've got to give positives and negatives, but we must do it specifically to social media, and we must talk about the performer and the sport. So I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly because of time pressure. Social media, what is it? Is it AO1? Here's our examples, AO1. It allows an elite performer such as Mark Rashford to engage directly. Mark Rashford's employer, Manchester United, will encourage him to post to increase visibility. Manchester United will even employ trained teams of social media experts to ensure that messages are positive and uniting. The advantage to the performer that they can raise their profile, they're more likely to attract sponsorship, they can increase their earnings. He's also able to promote causes. We've got here that some of the negatives, remember negatives we've got to evaluate. He might get abusive messages like racism. He received this after missing a penalty in the Euros, right? These messages have gone unpunished, or some of them. This can be very damaging to anyone, especially a young person like Rashford, still trying to find their way in the world. That kind of philosophical point I've made there. I quite like that. It's made me just reflect. And we've got here, furthermore, Marcus Rashford could lose privacy. It could be an endless cycle of constantly posting into the public eye. The advantage to the sport, now I've obviously gone to the sport here, it's more visible to more people, a growth in sponsorship, more youngsters take part in grassroots, more role models. We've got the idea that Marcus Rashford could post, he could go on and post coaching and training tips to his followers and even answer their questions. On the other hand, if social media is used to share negative role models, such as doping or violence, this can be harmful. Minority sports, such as Paralympic sports, there should be an A in there, cannot compete with the big budget sports like football and are unable to employ teams of social media experts. So we've got inequity here. And then these minority sports can become more and more marginalised as a result. Now notice my conclusion. In conclusion, I strongly believe that social media has the capacity to be very positive for both performance and sports, but this needs to be managed carefully. Even Rashford, for example, even if Rashford was to do something negative, such as to swear a match of the day or worse, he would be able to use his social media presence to share his message of apology and regret. For this reason, I believe that social media and sport have many happy years of companionship ahead. Wow! Look at that. Look at that. It's like, I don't know what it's like, but that's a beautiful thing. Now, the point, rather than my sort of linguistic poetry here, what I'm going to sort of say here is, notice what I've done, is I've said the positives and the negatives of this specifically on both him and football. That's what I did. Now you can argue I can do it better or worse. That's up to you. It's for you to interpret. But I certainly did that. Right, I think that's going to be half time.
Okay, and we're back. Marta's just dashed out of the room because she's taking our daughter works on a reception at a health club, and she's just dropping her off. So it's grotty here outside, so umbrellas are everywhere. I think we do have some questions. Marta's left me a little document with questions on it. So I got some questions. I believe these might all be from the same person. I don't know your name, so forgive me. The first one is, why does James's daughter support Man City? Good. I don't know is the straight up answer to that. All I know is when I took her to the Etihad, she talked a lot about Jack Grealish's calves. So I don't know whether that was specifically the reason, but that's amongst the reasons. You've also asked, what is an example of a complex skill? So when you talk about complex skills, I certainly would be looking at that sort of notion of decision making. We've got here, those key points are lots of decisions, learn slowly, high level of coordination, high level of concentration. So in my opinion, I would always go for something which is sort of receiving as the example of complex skill. So a great example of that would be something like defending in basketball, hockey, netball, football, because you're making lots of decisions and it's complex in terms of how you've got to interpret the environment. So I would go for something like that. Okay, so something, and you could also go for sort of fielding type conditions or batting in either baseball or rounders or cricket, or these sorts of things would be good, because of course you've got to make decisions based on what's presented to you. So there's decision making involved in that. Other questions were, how would a wrist spin be implemented into an A2 sport? An example. I'm not sure how to answer that one exactly, because it depends on what the context is. Okay, so I don't know if you want to clarify for me what the context is of how you'd include wrist spin as an A2 sport example. I'm not sure if you're asking me about information processing or something different. And you also said for gender, culture, stereotypes, would you put that with sexism or culture? Well, it's a great question, by the way, and fair play to you for asking that, but it's essentially both. I mean, in this case, it fits probably most neatly into stereotypes, but of course, it's just cultural stereotypes. So in essence, it's a crossover, it's a merge, it's a grey area. But what I would just like to say about stereotypes, though, that is an interesting thing for you just to reflect on, is remember that stereotypes are what are called an overgeneralization. Okay, it's an overgeneralization based on false information. That's what a stereotype is. Okay, so it's actually interesting to reflect on that particular concept, because what we then do is we sort of attract evidence to that stereotype, and we sort of notice things that agree with the stereotype and don't notice things that don't. It's called confirmation bias. A very interesting concept, and I encourage you just to think about that. We've got a message here, I think, as well. What other question? This is from Jessica. I think Jessica Hillier. Thank you very much for your question, Jessica. The question is here. What other questions might we get with engagement topic? So I would say the key things there. I think the classic commands in there would be things like discuss. You might also be asked for reasons why. So explain why. Let's say age is affecting participation, or ethnicity, or disability. So that explain why, or giving reasons. I would say as well. Possibly the other thing to be thinking about there is you might be asked to provide possible solutions to problems. Okay, so if you recognize, let's take gender as the example we were just talking about, we know that there's significantly more media coverage of male sport. Then one of the solutions could be that broadcasters like the BBC or Sky or BT Sports, they commit to some kind of charter of representation. You know, that switching the problem into a possible solution is a really nice way. It also gives you ammunition for your conclusion type statements as well. So if you're doing a 6 or a 9 on engagement patterns, you could take that, here's the problem, this is the possible solution, and then you can switch that into your conclusion. So those would be examples. But certainly the discuss command, explain why, and the other classic thing you're going to get is data representation, some kind of graphical or tabular data that you have to extract. And I just want to repeat that point. You must incorporate the data which is in the graph or table into your response to back up the argument that you're presenting. So Jessica, I really appreciate your question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Now, as I said earlier on, the second half of tonight will go a little bit shorter shorter than the first half. We've still got a decent chunk to do. And just to reiterate a point again, you'll notice there with the commercialization and the media stuff, we were talking about the performer, on the sport, on the spectator, on the official, on the sponsor. We're going to go straight into a section where we almost need to mirror that, this time looking at the impact of technology rather than commercialization and the media. But the concept is the same. As the student, you must be capable of identifying the specific grouping that the question is asking you, and that is something that will mark out students as being stronger or less strong in exam responses. So with that in mind, let's see if we can crack on with this. Like I say, a little bit shorter than the first part. I would anticipate, folks, that we will be finishing right, for those of you that have got thinking about transport, things around about 10 past. Oh, we do have a question in here, and the question is, what topic would you think will come up in the 6 and 9 mark for each paper? With respect, I'm not going to predict what the 6 and 9 mark question is. If I did, I would be misrepresenting reality. The reality is that the 6 and 9 mark question could come up off any of those topics on the AEI. That's the only thing I can guide you on. I suppose I put the information processing one on because I know the history of 6 and 9 marks, and I know it hasn't been covered before. So I would maybe mention information processing. I'll tell you what I'll do. At the end of the session, I'll put up for you a history of all the 6 and 9 mark topics so you can see exactly what there's been before. And then maybe that will give you a bit of an insight. But I'm not prepared to predict 6 and 9 markers. I'd simply say to you that on Exam Simulator, we've got lots and lots and lots of examples of 6 and 9 markers covering the AEI content. And I would encourage you to go and answer those and use the mark schemes. I can't suggest to you learning one thing more than another. It would be unethical of me. Okay, so with that all understood, let's get on with part 2. Here we go. So, in many ways, when we look at the impact of technology, we're doing the same thing. We're evaluating folks, and you can even see the image structure is the same. We're putting positives and negatives. We're talking about the performer, the spectator, the official, and so on. Did we do sponsor? I think we probably do. I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, we do, definitely. Mind blank. Anyway, let's have a look here. What does the technology do for the performer? Better clothing and equipment, better facilities, better feedback. Think about that extrinsic feedback. We can link that here. Better diagnostics. How am I doing? More stats and tracking. Again, feedback. Fewer injuries based on more information. Rehabilitation. More inclusive with blades, chairs for Paralympic sports. And more inclusive. These are beautiful things, right? Better safety due to the development of helmets and PPE. So this is wonderful for a performer. But there are negatives. It's not for all, so we can say there's a lack of equity, it's expensive. It only benefits rich clubs, as I just said. Performance continuously assessed under pressure. Imagine if everything you do is kind of diagnosed, that's a pressure thing, and weaknesses highlighted. They're the issues for us and why and how we can evaluate. For the sport, we get better feedback and analytics, again, increased accuracy of timings, think about measuring equipment, improved design of sporting equipment, makes it more spectacular, more modern. Improved facilities means, you could say here as well, like less cancellations. Okay, you could even apply this to things like drainage if you want to get really into your kind of horticulture, but less cancellations of things like rugby, football matches. Think of the impact that going to 3 and 4G on hockey would have had to grasp the consistency of the playing surface. They played that on grass before, by the way. I did when I was a kid. I'm sure your teachers probably have. Better experience. I've taught hockey on grass at the start of my career. I don't know why I'm going with that. Better experience for paying spectators. Okay, they get better stadia, this sort of thing, and excitement awaiting VAR decisions. Okay, so there's some cool stuff going on for the sport themselves. So it builds a bit of intrigue, but it's unequal. The cost is the issue here. The best tech team often win. I think a really good example of this would have been Team Sky in the cycling, now Ineos. These often considered to be the best, great riders, obviously, but obviously the best tech, and arguably went on to win for some of those reasons. Delays in the game, waiting for off-field decisions. So technology can slow everything down. Rugby union springs to mind. Delays in the stadium can cause frustration. So there's some negatives in there as well. On the officials, they make better decisions more often. They've got radio, they've got mics. They can communicate more easily with one another if they're a team of officials. And also, this important point, good decisions are made public. And that's a really good thing. But if they get it wrong, they're murdered. Not literally. I don't mean that. That's not a nice thing to say. They're sort of, if they get it wrong, they're sort of vilified in the media. That's what I meant. Delete reference to murder. That's not what I meant. Officials become over-reliant on technology. And here we've got not available to all due to cost. Okay, so it's only relevant to some. Now I've got to change canvases there. Very immediate break.
So let's continue with our spectators here. On the impact of technology. So we've got better stadia, we've got better coverage, we've got more accurate decisions. All of this is preferred by the spectator, obviously. You've got better performance quality. It's more entertaining because the technology effectively helps the performers actually get better in what they're doing. Think about that diagnostics and feedback. You go and watch that. That's what the output of that is. Quite exciting, right? You get better players, better performers, better records, better speeds, better heights. Better access to performers via social media, okay, so you can have direct interaction with performers. But there are negatives. Hey, hang on a minute, that shouldn't say better. Hang on a minute, we've got a mistake here. Just bear with me. I'm going to fly all the way down my notes and make sure that I can tell you exactly what this should be. Here we go. What we should have here is, this shouldn't be here. This should be increased ticket prices. We made a mistake with that image. I'm so sorry, folks. Make sure that you put that one in, and this one's fine. Delays while waiting. You know, VAR is a good example. I actually find the better example here is the TMO in rugby. There's so many waits in rugby, so many pauses. I personally find it quite tedious. I love the sport of rugby, both league and union, but my goodness, there's a lot of waiting for television match officials. Now, impact of technology on the sponsor. Some of these are quite nuanced, okay? So they get more visibility because the adverts and brands are shown through better media. TV is the best example. They go to a wider audience. That's really good for obviously the sponsor. Therefore, they've got increased sponsorship opportunities. The tech can be sponsored itself. So think about something like, I don't think it's happened yet, but take VAR in football. How long until Samsung sponsor VAR? How long before KFC sponsor the television match official in rugby? It's gonna happen, isn't it? So there's other opportunities to actually sponsor the technology itself. But there are negatives. It costs more in a high technology world to develop adverts. You've got to do it in a very sort of whizzy-dizzy fancy way. You've got to have really striking adverts. They need to be relevant to a wide audience. You know, think about the cultural differences in let's say a cricket audience in India and in England, to say it's quite a different sort of concept, isn't it? So you've got to be able to appeal to both potentially, and the costs increase for sponsorship based on more competition. So effectively it becomes more and more pricey, okay, all the time, because there's more and more competition. So those are the negatives. So let's look at some actual answers here. The development of technologies improve standards of refereeing and rugby union. Discuss this statement. So when you discuss this statement, you're trying to decide to what degree is it true or false. The only way to do this is to look at both sides of the argument. In other words, you're evaluating this. Is it true? Is it not true? So we've got here the TMO has dramatically increased consistency. So we're arguing for. Furthermore, high-quality microphone systems between the referee, TMO and touch officials, we're arguing for or true. Makes communication instantaneous and never understood. This means the elite rugby has far better referee in the whole. We're saying it's true. However, it is not all positive. Because of the TMO, on-field referees may become reluctant at making decisions. Oh, maybe it's false. And this can cause a lot of delays in play. Furthermore, technology is exclusive and grassroots rugby get no benefit. Maybe it's false. Okay, so the point I'm making there is I've looked at both sides. There's other points as well in the mark scheme you can have a look at, but I've looked at both sides. Now, when we discuss something, sometimes we want to reach an actual judgment at the end. So you could argue that I should have judged it at the end there, made a very short conclusion and say, but overall I think it's positive. Or I could say the next stage of development would be. So just bear in mind, now this is only worth 4 marks, so I didn't choose to make a conclusion. But because we've been asked to discuss the statement, there is an argument for making a conclusion here, at least in terms of the quality of writing. Certainly if you were writing this in an English lesson, folks, like you would be making a conclusion, wouldn't you? So why not do the same in PE? I didn't, by the way, so I'm criticising myself. Right, prohibited substances, folks. The key here, look what we are doing. We are evaluating. Okay, now we might only be asked to identify positives and negatives, but it's still evaluating. We're given strengths and weaknesses of each. So nice and quick here. Stimulants, we are talking about things like caffeine. We are talking about things like amphetamines. See if I can spell it correctly. Amphetamines, what do? They increase alertness. They increase both mental and physical alertness. Okay, that's what they do. So they're really good for games players. They're really good for boxers who need to dodge jabs and punches. But there's negatives. They can cause hyper. They cause you to be hyper. They can lead to shaking hands, nervousness, loss of concentration, and they can keep you awake. Caffeine, obviously, is a stimulant that's going to stop you sleeping. It's happened to me many a time. Narcotic Analgesics. Can we just clearly understand these are painkillers? Okay, these are painkillers based on opiates, basically. They reduce feelings of, this is meant to be pain, by the way, not plain. I'm feeling very plain today. Jeez, I feel plain every day. The days where I looked in the mirror and thought I was handsome are long gone. Anyway, we train and compete at higher intensity because we don't feel the pain of that kind of intensity. So that's good. And we train and compete when injured. Wait, that's good, isn't it? But hang on a second. This mass pain and injuries might make injuries worse. So obviously that might be negative. Oh, and by the way, you can get addicted to these things. There's a certain story in the media at the moment. It's a court case where someone's been addicted to narcotic analgesics. I'm not going to get into what that is, but the male involved in this has been describing this in recent days. Anabolic agents, obviously here we're talking about steroids, effectively testosterone. They increase muscle mass, increase muscle growth, they speed up recovery, which is a super important point, especially for injured people, and the competitor is more aggressive and competitive. So there's sort of like attitudinal changes. However, and can I just say as well, athletes who dope with steroids, they take them in massive quantities, and that's why they can cause heart and liver damage. They can cause testicular atrophy. This is the shrinking of testicles, boys. They can cause acne and mood swings. There are other androgynous effects. Androgynous means change in either the male or the physical characteristics of a person. So women also experience certain androgynous effects. So, for example, they get more of a kind of a striking chin, an Adam's apple, if they're taking these massive quantities. So there are other impacts as well. It can also lead to things like low sperm count for boys as well, and also a lack of naturally producing testosterone, because you become reliant on the testosterone in the system. Our tendency to produce it naturally decreases, which can have all kinds of issues. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that now. Peptide hormones, we're talking about EPO. This is erythropoietin. It's a naturally produced hormone. It stimulates red blood cell production. So if we take it, more red blood cells in the bone marrow are being produced by those stem cells you studied in biology. Increased oxygen carrying capacity, increased aerobic capacity for aerobic respiration. We can train, this is the statement I want you to include, higher intensities for longer. This should say for longer. Higher intensities for longer without fatigue. Okay, that's beautiful, but it makes our blood thicker and stickier, and it can increase blood pressure or resistance to that blood flow. Diuretics, these are drugs that effectively remove water from your system. Okay, so removing water, we can do rapid weight loss. So if we've got to make weight in judo, in boxing, in MMA, if we're a horse rider, jockey, and it'll flush out illegal substances. So this is a masking drug. So if I've been taking steroids, I might use a diuretic to hide the evidence. Dehydration it can cause because it makes you pee, and kidney damage. Okay, so there's some negatives in there, but notice positives and negatives. Let's have a look here. Identify one positive and one negative of a diuretic. You can make weight as a boxer, but it will dehydrate you. What have we got here? Discuss the use of steroids in boxing. Okay, so discuss. We've got to give the positives and the negatives. Benefit from increased muscle mass. We'll recover faster. Steroids, because they're taken by athletes in massive doses, can cause serious health problems such as kidney problems. Finally, steroids are known to affect gender markers. An example in men is that can experience a lower sperm count and even infertility in women. Wow. So this is serious stuff. Okay, but notice positives and negatives are covered. Okay, we're going to go straight in here. Why in sport football, why do we experience hooliganism? Now, I wonder about you young'uns. Are you clear with how bad things were in like the 80s and to an extent the 90s, but certainly in the late 70s and 80s? That's when I grew up, by the way. It was kicking off at football all the time. Why? Why was this happening? And of course, we've got now this kind of cultural heritage of hooliganism, especially in football. It happens in other sports. It can be linked to boxing as well. A lot of alcohol and obviously fighting involved in boxing. There can be sort of brouhahas and sort of squabbles and punches thrown in audiences and this kind of stuff. But we certainly saw, I cannot stress to you, growing up, I grew up in the 80s, right? I cannot stress to you how much violence there was around football matches, to the extent that it was really inappropriate for children to go. I used to go to a lot of football matches as a kid. I used to go and watch Carlisle United, that's where I grew up. My dad would often take me down to Liverpool matches, and I didn't see it myself, but then the coverage you would get on the TV afterwards would be that there was horrific stuff going on. So why? Why was this happening? First of all, maybe there was hype. This was being built and being built and being built, and these rivalries were overrepresented as so important. Whether those rivalries were Man United, Liverpool, whether these rivalries were Liverpool, Everton. We'll think about some of the places I've lived, whether it was Wrexham or Chester, Swansea or Cardiff, Forest or County, whatever it happens to be, they were sort of really sort of hyped up. We've also got that they're fueled by alcohol. People drink when they go to things like football matches, other sport as well. We get a gang culture. It's very masculine in its nature. We get this sort of gang mentality, and people sort of dissolve their individual identity into the crowd, right? And people experience frustration at football, losing, what they perceive as a bad decision by the ref, someone not trying hard enough. These are all reasons where things might kick off, okay? So these are reasons. But can I just sort of mention as well, loss of individual identity. I think it's a really important one to mention here. Now, some of the strategies we have to combat, and we see these very regularly, we'll have early kickoffs in very sort of big rivalry games, a kickoff at 12 o'clock or 12:30 on a Saturday. People now sit in football stadia in the main, obviously it depends on how big the club is. And this is a more sort of family atmosphere, so it's more family as a result. We segregate fans. Now, there's mixed research on this. Some research on segregation fans is called the figurational perspective, suggests this is actually ineffective, but we separate fans so they can't get at one another. We have better security. Think about CCTV. Think about stewards. Think about police. All of this is going to obviously discourage. We've got alcohol restrictions. Alcohol used to be banned in the past from football. You can now buy a beer in a football stadium, but you certainly can't buy anything but beer, wine, cider. Something that you can't be buying spirits and shots. Something that's going to, as it were, tank you up. That's not possible. Travel restriction, banning orders, so people with previous convictions just can't go. And finally, perhaps this is the best way to think about it, is we learn another way. Now, there's no argument that we want to lose the sort of sporting heritage of football, these local rivalries. I think it's special to a lot of people, me included, but we can't have it kicking off like it used to. It's ridiculous, and so these are some of the ways that we can prevent it. So, questions. Suggest 3 reasons hooliganism may occur: rivalry, alcohol, masculinity, gangs. Okay, so I've put 3 marks only. Obviously, I've applied the principle here of what we call the bogey. If you're a golfer, you'll know what I mean. The principle of the bogey is give 1 more than it's kind of requesting. Okay, or here we've got 3 marks. 3 marks. Give maybe if you've got 4 answers, give 4 answers. Go 1 over. It's called the principle of the bogey. Do 1 extra just in case. Here, other than all-seater stadium and restricted alcohol sales, identify 3 strategies employed by professional football clubs to prevent hooliganism. Kick-offs early, more police and security, segregation. I've put my bogey in again. Banning people. Okay, so it's asked for 3, I've given 4. Now, just one thing about here though. Generally speaking, if they ask you for 3, they will only mark the first 3. So make your first 3 answers as strong as possible. Even if you're going to make a 4th and a 5th, make the first 3 strong. All right, one more here. Evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies. So we've got, in recent years, football clubs have introduced all-seat stadium alcohol restrictions. Evaluate. So strengths, positives and weaknesses. Calm atmosphere. It's expensive though, so I've gone from the positive to the negative. We're saying here restrict alcohol means people behave better. There's my positive. And more calmly, but spectators are still able to drink in the pub. There's the negative. Notice I'm evaluating. I've got 1, 2 positives. I've got 1, 2 negatives. I must make those positives and negatives in this context. Okay, I'm going to go straight into this. We're going to look at the role of carbohydrates, fats and protein. Now, obviously, what you've got on the screen here does a lot of the work for you, but let's go for it. Right, carbohydrates are our main, and in fact, can I just say they are the preferred source of energy at all intensities of exercise. In fact, there you go, it's preferred energy source. So our carbohydrates, whether it's in our sort of our longer chains, where we might be talking about brown rice, brown bread, or whether we're talking about the ingestion of sugars, this ultimately was going to happen to those carbohydrates. Like you guys know, you know all about your amylase and your carbohydrates from your biology. We know that carbohydrates are broken down to glucose. The glucose is delivered to cells and is utilized in the mitochondria and in the sarcoplasts. You guys know this from your biology, right? But the point I want to make to you is linking back to paper 1, it's the fuel source for aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So whatever we eat, let's say we eat a big old chunk of bread, that's going to be broken down into glucose and it's going to then be delivered to the cell for respiration. Now, can we also stress that you can store carbohydrate, and we store it in the form of glycogen, and glycogen is stored both in the muscle and in the liver, so we can have it delivered again. So we've got a store. This is not a big store of sort of stored carbohydrates, however. Now, fats get a bad rap, but they're actually really important. They're a source of energy. In fact, they are very rich in energy. There's more energy than carbohydrates. However, they're used for low intensity exercise only. They also insulate the body, they protect vital organs, but folks, you know this, they support cell growth, like mitosis. Now, again, can I just stress here, no one's saying you have to write about mitosis and anaphase and telophase and all that sort of stuff no one's saying write that in PE. The point I'm trying to make to you is link this to your biology studies, just so for your own understanding. You know that cell membranes are a fatty tissue. Therefore, where the fat we consume, what happens to it? Well, linked to our biology studies, it helps with cell membranes, right? That's what it's for. So I'm just helping you to understand the broader picture. Proteins, absolutely crucial to performer. Muscle tissue growth, okay? Proteins, you guys again know from your biology, we take in proteins, then in the stomach they react with protease, they break down to amino acids, they're ingested into the blood, and then of course we build them back up in the ribosomes to form other human proteins, whether it's hormones or whether it's muscle tissue or whatever, and that's what it is. But they're there for repair. When we adapt, remember, adaptation is from training, okay? So if we train, we get this adaptation. Small amount of energy from protein. Don't take this one too seriously. The human body would only use protein for energy under two conditions. One, if you were in absolutely extreme exercise conditions like an ultra marathon and you completely run out of fat and glycogen reserves, you could then start effectively absorbing your muscle tissue. And I don't like talking about this one, but someone who's experiencing starvation or very, very serious eating disorders can actually consume their own muscle tissue and even their own internal organs for protein for energy. It's grim stuff. I don't want to get into it. Provides amino acids for formation of other proteins. So amino acids then for other proteins. You guys know all about that from biology. No need to. So vitamins and minerals. There's no need to learn specific examples. Just general points. They're important for the working of the body efficiently. Use this word, and they're for general health. Okay, so that's what we're referring to here. Let's go a touch further. We want to know about water balance. Okay, so with water balance, key things for us. Dehydration is an issue, especially obviously when it comes to just bear with me a second. Sorry, I was trying to find my place in my notes. Apologies, folks. So first of all, let's define dehydration. We're talking about excessive loss of body water, okay? And this interrupts the functions of the body. So it's not just losing water, it's to an extent that it interrupts what our body needs to do. Water balance prevents dehydration. So we want this to stop this. That's what we're doing. Now, if we don't achieve that water balance, what happens? Well, first of all, we get viscosity of the blood. In essence, we lose plasma because plasma is based on water. So if we lose blood plasma as a proportion of the blood, our blood cells, particularly red blood cells, are a greater proportion. It gets thicker and stickier, more viscous. This means that we get a reduction in blood flow. Therefore, we get less O2 and we recover more slowly. Our heart rate has to go up to compensate because our stroke volume goes down. So to maintain our cardiac output, our heart rate goes up. Link back to your paper one stuff. We get hotter as a result. We feel faint, we pass out, we can't carry on. Problems. Our reaction time increase. Notice this is bad. Oh, increase, that's good, right? No, this means we slow down. So we can't make decisions. We can't respond quickly enough. Our decision making becomes poor. We make lots of mistakes when we're dehydrated. This is why you see it often at the end of performances, and we might experience fatigue and cramps. And we'll experience the cramp because, along with the water being lost, we'll lose electrolytes. Now, electrolytes is just another word for minerals, but minerals, especially sodium and calcium, are involved in muscular contraction. And if we lose too many of them, our muscles go into cramp phase. Effectively, they become what we call tetanic. They cramp up. Okay, so that's obviously a negative. Now, we're gonna, I think, I do have some questions on that, but I think they're on another canvas. Just bear with me. So we're really close. I don't know whether you can hear in the background, but someone's chopping on a chopping board in the kitchen next to me. Apologies for that. Anyway, explain why a jockey in cross-country horse riding needs both carbohydrates and protein. So again, we've got to explain why, so we've got to give reasons. But again, we must cover both carbohydrates and protein. So they need carbohydrates as the preferred energy source. They maintain performance throughout the race. Proteins help with muscle tissues to grow, and they provide enough strength to be able to control the horse. So we're applying that in this case to the horse riding example. Here, increased heart rate is one effect of dehydration. State three other effects. So we've got thicker blood, increased body temperature, cramp. So just identifying 3 there. And finally, justify, which must mean that we, it's an AO3 skill, it must mean that we give reason for what's been stated here, the importance of hydration for a squash player. So we must say why this is important. It leads to, dehydration, or in this case, increased blood viscosity would lead to less oxygen being delivered to the leg muscles, and that would mean that they were slower during points. It would increase their temperature, which could cause the squash player to overheat. And muscle cramps could lead to squash player being unable to reach a drop shot. So you see what I've done there is effectively I've taken that sort of spider diagram of dehydration and the effect of dehydration and I've said how that they would affect a squash player. They'd be slower during points. They'd overheat on court. They'd be unable to reach a drop shot. So I'm not just saying, hey, this is what happens when we dehydrate. No, I'm saying this is how it impacts squash player. And you must talk about that impact. Sometimes we could refer to it as an outcome. If you're interested in this notion, I've got a whole blog post about it. If you go to our blog, I released, was it my last blog post? I think it was my very last one, actually. So I'm going to have a look at that, about the sort of the nature of practical examples. Now, of course, I know you're going to say, well, practical examples are AO2. Well, in this case, we're justifying, which is an AO3 skill, by using practical examples, so hence it's AO3. Now, have I got any more questions? No, we are golden. All right, so folks, back to have a chat with you. And we are back. A drink of water is definitely necessary. So, first of all, if you've got questions on the hub page, do please fire them in. I've got some notes here from Marta, so a couple of things she wants me to mention. She wants me to give a shout out, actually quite a special shout out this one, actually, because we've got 3 students from, I won't mention which school I know which school you're at because I know your teacher is Mr. Sullivan. I won't be too specific, and just therefore a shout out to Freya, Druv and Circab. We really appreciate the messages that you have been firing in, so thank you very much for that. A couple of things as I sort of ponder and wait for a couple of questions potentially to come in. Can I please stress, obviously what we've done here is we've covered all of the AEI material on paper 1 and paper 2 across the 2 sessions we've done. I would argue now you are now equipped with those notes pages, with those practice questions, model answers, mark schemes. You're now equipped to go and really overlearn that material on the AEI. You'll notice a lot in the notes pages we put huge emphasis on quality imagery, and that's so that you can come back to that imagery and really get the key information and accuracy from that. I cannot tell you the extent to which we analyse past papers, mark schemes, and extract the key language that's related to your particular course and what your mark scheme structures will be. So I urge you, please, take the language that's been used in the session and apply that into your answers. You'll also notice with me that I try and embed that learning and bring in learning from other areas, so that sort of natural synoptic skill is embedded in that teaching as well. And obviously I've been linking quite a bit today to biology at times, especially around the nutrition stuff. So that's that. Now, we don't have any questions at the moment, so I'm going to sort of start to wrap up a little bit. My evening is looking fantastic. I've got a spin class at 6 o'clock, and then I've got a Man City match to look forward to with Georgina, as we talked about before. And we've got a question here. We've got a question from John Fleck. Hi, John. How are you? I've seen your stuff on YouTube and seen the GCP commitment. This is amazing, extremely informative. Keep up the amazing work and a huge inspiration to me. Oh, John, come on. You can't say things like that on camera. I'll well up. I'll start crying if you do things like that. But, John, that's a super kind thing for you to say. I don't know. I appreciate it, and I know where you're coming from. My personal take on this is that, look, we've got students around us who I think have had a real tough deal in the last 2 or 3 years, and I just want to do my bit to support that. That's how I personally view it. Okay, so look, what do you do when you've got resources? What do you do when you've got a website? What do you do when you've got a platform and an email mailing list? What do? Do you just do that? Just use that stuff to flog stuff and make money for what? What's the, here I feel good that we're doing good things for young people, and that's something that I'm really, really proud of. I personally reflect on these sessions. I go, I listened back, I went too fast and my speech isn't clear enough. That's how I always tend to look back and find the negative, you know what I mean? But I really appreciate that that you've said that thing. That's really, really kind, and yeah, I appreciate it. And I'll just say as well to you teachers out there, do make a point of having a look at the blog posts we're putting out there. So relevant to sort of exam material as well at the moment. Things like all the stuff on the AI, but also the practical examples. We're putting out stuff on the infographics, all that kind of thing. Question from Jessica here. I'm sorry. What are the key things to know about diet and dehydration? Like, is it just the things you told us about, or is there more content we need to know? That content I covered
is extracted specifically from the mark schemes, Jessica. So that, as far as we are able to do at this point, is the exact and specific language and understanding that you would be expected to apply. Now, of course, that you're going to be asked it in a context, right? So you might be asked about diet and hydration, a particular context related to a particular performer. That's yours. You've got to have that skill of applying it to that context. But outside of that, the information I've just shared with you is absolutely specific. Got a couple of questions. I think this is from Veer, Drove and Zirko again. I love how James supports his community and does it for the people rather than himself. Look, there is no altruism in the world as far as I'm concerned, you folks. So I don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting I'm somehow some kind of saying that isn't my stance. I'm an idiot six or seven times every single day, honestly. Like, I'm a deeply mediocre person. Like, make no bones about it. But there's some things that matter. In my opinion, there's some things that matter more. And when I'll be honest with you, GCSE students, the groups that are worrying me most are the A-level kids, because in year 11 they didn't go through what you guys are going through now, and they are basically preparing for really tough A-level exams. Having never gone through the year 11 thing, that really concerns me. So if I'm honest with you, it's them that I'm thinking about most. But then obviously providing the resource on the A-level, it makes no sense not to do that for the GCSE lot as well. So that's why we're doing it for both. Obviously we care about you guys as well, of course we do. But I just want to put that across. But please don't be fooled into thinking that I'm sort of virtual signalling or whatever. For me, it's a common sense thing to do. It makes sense at this point to do that. But you're very welcome. And Jessica's saying also, thank you very much for the sessions. Appreciate it. Look, it's really my pleasure, honestly. I love it. If I had more time, I would do that. I like the showing off thing, so I quite like doing this. But yeah, I really appreciate everyone's involvement. Thank you so much for the messages to John, to Veer, to Druv, to Zergup, to Jessica. I really appreciate all those messages. And you three that are at Mr. Sullivan's school, I'll make sure I give him a shout tonight to let him know that you've. Oh, Martha just messaged me to say she's already done that, but I'll make sure you get a little bit of recognition for being involved this afternoon. Go revise. Keep yourself sane, look after yourselves, and we're always available on social media. We're always available on the platform where there's chat. We're always available to answer your questions. Do ask them. Go do it, okay? We believe in you. All the best.